joining us here online. So while we're waiting, this will be very informal, and we hope that you are all going to participate. While we're waiting to get fully underway, why don't you participants, either in the chat box or in the Q&A, just give us a shout out where you're calling in from or where you're dialing in from today, just so you can get your fingers warmed up, because we want you to ask questions throughout this webinar. So feel free to just say hello and where you're joining us from, and we'll get underway in just a few seconds.
Oh, Amherstburg. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
Great. So we will get rolling, and we'll say hello to everybody as they're joining. So thank you everybody for joining us today for this webinar on the insurance issues that are facing historic sites during this COVID-19 crisis. My name is Robert Pajot. I'm the project manager for regeneration at the National Trust for Canada here in Ottawa. And just quickly for those of you who don't know who we are, I think most of you do. The National Trust, we're a national charity based here in Ottawa, and we really do work to advocate for and support historic places and people like you that are out there bringing our heritage to life. So we, during this crisis, have been doing a number of additional webinars on specific topics that everybody is facing these days, because it is a moment when a lot of people are trying to adapt to and then planning for recovery. So we have been really grateful for a lot of our participants and for our guest panelists that we've managed to have participate in our webinars. And so today's session, and I should just mention that I will at the end let you know of some other learning opportunities and other webinars that we have planned, including one tomorrow, but other ones that are coming up. So there's a bunch on deck planned. Now today, we are extremely fortunate and grateful to have with us Lynn Godfrey, Head of Customer Relations, Client Relations at Front Row Insurance, and Steve Beattie, Partner and Executive Vice President of Front Row Insurance, to help us have a discussion about the insurance issues that are being faced by historic sites currently during the COVID crisis. We know from here at the National Trust, we get a lot of comments and concerns about broader insurance issues at historic sites. From homeowners, from businesses and organizations that own historic places. There are lots of issues in general with historic places and insurance. We wanted, and we will be, in fact, having probably one, if not two, additional webinars specifically on either homeowner related issues, historic homeowner related insurance issues, or organizational issues for historic places. But today's focus, we want it to be very topical, and for right now during the crisis, to focus in on historic sites that are open to the public, that usually at this time of year would be super busy with programming, with events, with fundraising, and are shutting, or are closed, I should say, or in the process of planning for the reopening. So we thought this would be a very good moment to talk about some of the issues that are being currently faced by you guys at your historic sites. So that's why we're extremely happy to have Steve and Lynn with us to talk about what they're seeing from their perspective at Front Row Insurance. And I'll let Steve perhaps actually introduce Front Row, because you guys have been teaching us a lot at the National Trust. We've partnered on a number of things, and you guys have been amazing support to us in our work. So we thank you for that, and thank you both for joining us today, because you are both extremely busy. It's a very busy time in your world. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve. And again, I'm going to encourage you, all the participants, to jump in the Q&A box or the chat box. I'll be monitoring those. If you have any specific questions on today's topic, which is about historic sites that are open to the public, but if you have, because we're in the planning stages for our other webinars on insurance issues, if you have other ones that you'd like us to be addressing or things that you'd like us to research before our next webinar, please drop them in that the chat box or the Q&A box, because that'll be very useful for us in our planning. Or you can always get in touch with me. And this deck will be sent to you as participants, as will the Q&A summary. So you'll all be getting this. You don't have to take down notes furiously. So now with that, Steve, I am going to turn it over to you.
Okay, super. Thank you, Robert, and thank you, National Trust, and everybody for joining in on this discussion today. And we really do want it to encourage what Robert said. We'd like it to be a discussion. So if things come to mind that are particular to your own circumstances right now, feel free to put a message in the chat box, and we'll respond to those, and who knows where that'll take us. But our brokerage firm that Lynn and I are part of is Frontal Insurance, and our specialty is in arts and entertainment, media, and culture. So the way that we became involved many years ago in heritage properties was through our work initially with historic theaters. That's where the specialty started to develop. I've been in the industry for about 32 years and insured many different types of buildings, but as my focus became more and more specific to arts and entertainment and culture, the heritage properties kept coming up. And now as a result of that, we've got a very unique portfolio of not only theaters, but other private clubs and historic buildings that are in various states of progress. Some of them have been restored and they're being operated. Others are at the point where they are just, there's capital projects underway and there's construction activity going to begin. And, you know, that's what makes this so particularly challenging for all of us, is that, you know, our lives have been kind of put on hold for the time being. And, you know, a lot of the exciting things that we would see in our portfolio happening at this time of year, we're not seeing. You know, we do a lot of live performances and special events and festivals and all kinds of things that just aren't going to happen. But you know what? I do believe that we, you know, this is, we will get through this. I think Canada, we will get through it. I think the world will get through it. We'll figure it out. So I don't want the conversation, as much as it feels a little dire with some of the things we talk about with all the pressures and that. I want to say that I'm very optimistic, and I know Lynn is, and I know Robert is, in terms of what our future looks like. We just have to figure out how to manage it at this point. So going on to the, you know, the insurance business, it's very cyclical. And the cycles at one time used to run, you know, every 5 or so years. But what's happened in my career is I've been through 2 very hard insurance markets. And what I mean by that, these are times where premiums start to go up. Insurers insure less. They don't want to give as broad a coverage. And it always seems to happen at the same time, right? It's one of these things. And this particular market that we're in right now has really been compounded and further complicated, obviously, by the COVID-19 situation. And as a result of that, it's making it particularly painful for anyone who's buying insurance, anyone who's renewing insurance. And as brokers, we're having to really figure out a way to navigate our way through it for our clients. The last hard market, really hard market, was about 16 years ago. And just to give you a little bit of background on the way the insurance companies manage their businesses, is there's 2 sides to an insurance company's business. One is to try and generate some sort of profit from underwriting. So that's the dollars they take in as premiums as compared to the amount of claims that they pay out. The way that they'll offset losses on their underwriting is through investing the premium dollars and getting a return on investment. So what happens when the market changes, and where we were at even prior to COVID-19, probably towards the end of 2019, we really started to see a change in the insurance market and the attitudes of the insurance underwriters. What happens is the losses start to go up. There's been historically, over the last number of years, a greater reduction in terms of income that they can generate from the premiums. And then what happens is, as those lines cross, they start to panic and they realize that they're not making money off their insurance operations, paying out more dollars in claims than they're taking in premium, and they're not making an offset in their investment income. And so when that starts to happen, there's a lot of pressures that they start to feel, and they react quite severely and quickly. And that's where the pain comes from. And I know from talking to Robert and from some of the members that some of you are experiencing this, whether it's an increase in premium or whether it's an insurance company telling you they're no longer willing to or able to insure you. This is where the pain starts. And that's clearly not a buyer's market. It's the worst combination of things. And unfortunately, heritage properties, you know, in many cases, even the restored properties, underwriters, insurance companies that don't really have an appetite for it, but may be insuring it, will look at them as old properties, and no longer are they target, no longer are they of interest to them, and they push them out, or they put a very severe, severe premiums, big increases. If you talk to the brokers, and this is consistent really across Canada and quite frankly globally, brokers will tell you that they're seeing increases between about 10% as high as 50%, and then even on things that would normally be not a problem to buy insurance on, they're not even able to get quotations. And if you happen to have a situation where you've experienced a flood, a fire, some sort of circumstances where your insurance company has paid a claim, then they're going to treat you even more severely. And we're probably in this for another several years. It probably won't be as severe after we go a year or so, but I think we have to prep ourselves that it is going to be a longer term situation, and that what we have to do is the best thing for you to be able to do as a buyer of insurance is to educate yourself, understand what it is, and make sure that you're always keeping your options open and allowing yourself enough time to be able to look at what those options are. And that's by talking to your broker well in advance of when your policies renew, initiating those conversations, asking them what they think they can anticipate for the renewal. So when we look at management of organizations and boards, obviously navigating this, were just tons of challenges. And I've sat on numerous boards, and I know from the not-for-profit, particularly the not-for-profit sector, it's not like any of us are sitting with bags of cash in the back room to be able to ride out these difficult times. So we're encouraging clients to make sure that they're availing themselves to all the emergency subsidies that are available through the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, Heritage Canada, and the other foundations and associations that you're potentially, or endowment foundations that you're potentially connected with, or that might fall within your mandate. And open communication with sponsors and donors, making sure you're talking about different ways of creatively fulfilling those obligations. And what I mean by that is that if you have a sponsor or a donor who expected something, obviously in return for you to do what you do and to have your space open and available to the public, if you're not able to do that, again, we're encouraging clients to have creative discussions about what you might be able to do. We've seen all kinds of great spaces being opened up digitally for people to tour museums and art galleries. And these are ways that you're able to reach out, stay connected with your donors, but also stay connected with the people who you're having come into your spaces and enjoy your spaces. We also are cautioning people to be very, very careful when it comes to creating your new contracts and making new commitments, because we don't know what the end of this looks like, and because we don't know what reopening really looks like at this point. If you're entering into new obligations, it's important to consider how are you going to fulfill those obligations in the event that you're still prevented from opening. You want to make sure that you're not setting yourself up for a further problem, for a breach of a contract, for instance. Talk to your lawyers, talk to your human resources people, talk to your IT people, everybody that, your network of professionals. I encourage you to talk to them. I mean, I've included insurance broker in there because we are one, but we're getting a lot of calls from clients and clients reaching out to us looking for some direction or just even a sounding board as to things they should be thinking about. We'll talk a little later about where we see some of the increased risks coming. And again, I think it becomes even more clear at that point why it's important to reach out to some of these professionals. When it comes to the insurance,
Steve,
understand.
sorry,
Yes.
can I, not to interrupt, totally interrupt your flow.
No, it's fine.
Interrupt your flow, I'll leave it. I just want to say, like to emphasize this piece about communication, because one thing, as you mentioned, the insurance broker, one thing that people might not know is that in insurance, we are at the hub of finance, donors, because of our client base. We have clients in the IT sector. We have government contacts. There are all kinds of reasons why people might like to keep their insurance broker, or like us, who are right in the middle, in the thick of things, informed about what is going on, because they can I'm just trying to back up your point there. They can be a very good source of advice,
Yeah.
really good source of advice. And also on, as you say, because we're both on boards, and my most recent webinar on legal aspect from being on the board is that always, as you were mentioning, this communication means transparency.
Yeah.
And transparency is so important when you're trying to figure out your next steps with your community, within your community. Everybody needs to share that information so that you can make a solid plan. Sorry there.
Oh, no, it's fine, because it's a really good point, because I mean, as Lynn says, we're having conversations of different with different clients all the time. We're also talking, with the government, different things like that. So yeah, again, I think it's that ability of educating yourself, or the intention of educating yourself enough so you can ask good questions and understand what questions should be asked. It's really, I mean, insurance is one of these daunting things that nobody really wants to deal with. But I think at times like this, I find myself always reaching out to all the professionals that I know to help guide me a little bit. I make a point here on this slide about reviewing the insurance, and that really is about educating yourself. And, we often have clients ask us, so what are we covered for? And yes, that's important, but it's also, I always tell clients, it's more important that you know what you're not covered for. And when we talk later about business interruption, again, this highlights the fact of people sometimes assume certain things, are a little intimidated to actually get into an insurance policy because it just feels unpleasant and daunting. But, I encourage you to do it. And again, ask those questions to your lawyer, to your insurance broker. And the other thing in terms of talking to the broker, and I encourage people to do this right now, is if you're particularly either midway through a policy, or if you're at the point of renewing a policy, ask how the reduction of your operations will impact your premium. We have a lot of things going on right now where, we went from thousands of people going into a venue, for instance, and now they're dark. There's nobody going in there. So what we're working to do is allow, is to encourage the insurance companies. Insurance companies don't really like to see premiums come down, particularly at a time like this. So we're having to educate them, and we're having to draw their attention to the fact, well, yes, we had 500,000 people a year coming through this building. Now we don't have anybody, and the premium has to change. So that's an important thing. Open up that dialogue with your insurance broker, who will then have that conversation with your insurance company. So when we're looking, obviously we have so many buildings that are empty and unoccupied right now, and it's an important time to make sure that you are looking after your properties, looking out for the the well-being of those properties. Many insurance policies, in fact, I think you have to assume that every insurance policy has a vacancy, what they'll call a vacancy exclusion on it, which says that if a property is unoccupied or vacant for a period of 30 days or more, the coverage won't respond. That could be a fire, could be a flood, could be something else physically damaging the property. So very, very important that what you do is regularly visit the properties and keep a written log. I can't encourage you enough. Just have it by the door, the front door in the main office, where you go in and you just initial that you've gone through. And even to take it one step further, have a checklist. You know, that you check the doors, you went into the basement, check that we're sort of out of the heating season at this point. I hope it stays that way. But obviously freezing can be an issue in the winter months. I sure hope we're not dealing with this next winter. But if we are, it's very important to make sure that things like this are checked and recorded. And if you do have an incident and you have to make a claim on your insurance, it's really ideal to be able to hand them a written log and say, there's what we've been doing to make sure our property is well taken care of. Consider things like additional security. If you feel, I mean, some of our beautiful old buildings are in, you know, areas that might be challenged, you know, that may be more prone to break-ins. We're certainly seeing an increase in break-ins and vandalism. While we were in the cooler season, the winter seasons, there's always more risk of somebody breaking in and using it as a place of refuge to be able to, you know, get out of the cold. You want to look for those signs. You want to look for signs that there hasn't been any unauthorized access into your building. And again, documenting all of this is hugely important. Unfortunately, you know, at times like this, when we're dealing with struggles like we're dealing with, you know, the criminals seem to be able to find different ways to manipulate and exploit us. And this is where we're seeing it. We're seeing increased cyber-related crime. Privacy breach incidences are going up of systems being, you know, broken into, private information being breached. Think about this. Now we're all working from home. We're not in our offices. We're not with our colleagues and our peers. And therefore, it might be necessary to add a couple of layers of different protocols in place. If there's a transfer of funds, something that we see a lot are these phishing scams where people will purport to be someone else looking for funds to be transferred. And you need to put an extra layer in there. Phone calls, communication with your colleagues and your peers, making sure that you are you're dealing with a real person and not a criminal. We've definitely seen more situations where systems have been hacked into, more ransomware, more opportunities again to exploit. As we get towards reopening, and you know, we right now, and I in a way I think this is a good sign in terms of confidence, is we're getting a lot more calls right now about reopening and what are the things that our clients need to be doing to consider what they need to do to protect their staff, their volunteers, and their visitors. And so we don't have, I mean, what I'm doing right now is I'm looking to a variety of different sources. We're going to share a link later on that Robert has on a slide that is available to you. It talks a couple of different resources in terms of things to look at. But you do have to sort of gather together, you know, the best practices of the various health regulators and authorities, and try and do what is best for your organization that works. And I mean, there's a lot of concern about the liability that people may be taking on, or organizations may be taking on, once people start to come back and congregate. And I mean, that's an interesting, you know, there's definitely been a couple of claims initiated. There's one against Walmart right now in the US from an employee that is alleging that by coming to work, this is where they contracted the virus, and they're holding their employer, Walmart, responsible. I've read of a couple of other claims that are being brought against organizations. And it's too early to tell what's going to happen. But what I can tell you is that the way the insurance industry is reacting to this is that they are putting liability exclusions on policies to exclude these claims from your insurance. I don't make any excuses for insurance companies. I don't like the way that, you know, sometimes these things go down. But I do know that post 9/11, where we didn't have terrorism exclusions before, we saw terrorism exclusions. And now where we didn't see communicable disease or infectious disease exclusions, we are now starting to see it. And that really becomes an issue that we need to manage and you need to be aware of, because where you don't have insurance, obviously, it becomes more important to manage the risk and to consider what level of expectation does your public have on you, and what level of expectation would the laws place on you in terms of managing your space and making sure it's safe. So we'll talk a little bit further about that as we go along. Well, we're actually there right now. Sorry, I realized that this slide ran into the next. So the bodily injury. So this is the bodily injury liability is often called commercial general liability. You'll see that in your insurance policies. Triggers to these types of claims are an allegation that your negligence is what led to the claimants, the plaintiffs, bodily injury. So the allegation could be, as I said, we came to your space, somebody was hacking and coughing and showing visible signs. I told somebody in your staff, your front of house, your whoever's managing your space, I told them about this, they didn't do anything, and now I'm sick. Well, obviously this is a really difficult claim to make, but the reality is nothing can stop somebody from making an allegation against you. This is just the reality. And if a legal claim is initiated, you need to look towards whether your insurance company is actually going to defend that claim. The problem we're going to have, as I said just a moment ago, is we are going to start to see these exclusions popping up on general liability policies. And as soon as you have an exclusion, the obligation of the insurance company to defend you in that claim ceases. They don't have the obligation when the claim is clearly excluded. Now, with all of this said,
quick question, Steve.
Yeah.
Are you seeing specific protocols or types of protocols being developed now for different types of places? Like, are you seeing specific, like for theaters or developing, going beyond what public health authorities are recommending? That industry is going forward with new protocols. You're seeing that in different types of places?
Yeah, I think it is going to vary based on what the environment is. For instance, a space where it's a museum or an art gallery or an exhibit where people are walking through and they're able to very easily navigate or more easily navigate social distancing. Obviously, that's a different situation than sitting shoulder to shoulder with someone in a theater. And I think the theaters are really challenged because of, how do you socially distance? How do you manage these protocols and actually make your financial model work of having enough people in the theater? And that is unfortunately going to be a challenge. So I think there will be different models set up. I think there'll be a standard that will start to be established. But I find right now, from everything I'm reading, I don't have a clear direction at this point as to what each of those specific sectors are going to be doing at this point. I think as well on this area, we have to think about how are our courts and how do our laws deal with these types of allegations? I mean, we always have to, the law always has to balance out the public interest versus the personal interest of the individuals that are bringing the claim. And if you suddenly start to open up these types of claims to litigation, you're opening the floodgates, and I think the courts would be very aware of that. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so it's hard for me to speak from a legal perspective, but I think we have to realize that it's very, very difficult to pinpoint where somebody would have contracted this virus. I mean, we're all living in our homes with our families, and we're going to start socializing more with friends and colleagues and coworkers and going to meetings. All of a sudden, you start to try and pinpoint it on one spot. It's going to be very, very difficult to prove, and it'll be very, very interesting to see how it all plays out, and within the court system. But there's no doubt there will be claims. I mean, it's just inevitable. I think that there will be claims, and how far they're able to go is yet to be determined. I mentioned about the crime, cybercrime, and individuals just trying to simply exploit people. You should look at your insurance from the standpoint of how is it going to respond to the potential potential breaches. Your general liability won't respond to it. In many cases, crime insurance won't necessarily respond to the types of criminal activities we're seeing on a computer. Ransomware is big, and these ransomware scams are carried out by very, very sophisticated organizations that are very organized, and they know exactly what they're doing. And the problem is when you get into that situation, the insurance company can help you navigate your way through it. So I think it's important to ask yourself, what type of information do we have? How mission critical is the data that we have? How do we manage just the day-to-day things of transferring funds and doing our banking and all of that? And I would encourage you to look into your insurance program to see if it's going to respond to that type of thing.
Do many sorry, Steve, do
Yeah.
many brokers have guidance? I know that you guys develop all kinds of resources. As Lynn mentioned, as brokers, you guys have developed lots of different types of resources to help people. And is that one of the things that you've heard of other resources out there to help people prepare themselves, not-for-profits, for that particular threat?
Yeah, it's funny, cyber has been ramping up, obviously, as we've read more and more and seen more cases, and the sophistication of the criminals have gone up. What I find with the insurers is what the insurers we like to deal with have resources behind them in order to bolster what the risk management is with respect to cyber risk. And you'll sometimes find that you'll be able to tack something onto your commercial package of insurance. It's a cyber extension that might respond to some privacy breach. Usually they're okay, and if you have nothing else, they're good to avail yourself to. But we tend to like to focus on companies that, have independent consultants and advisors that can actually help navigate. Like when you're in the midst of a ransomware situation, we like to be able to go to them and have real boots on the ground in terms of managing it to get you through it, as opposed to waiting for the end and then dealing with it then. And the other thing with the privacy breach that's very, very important to keep in mind is that the various privacy commissioners require certain actions to be taken, and there's legislation that requires you, if you've had a breach, to notify the individuals whose information has been released. There's obligations. You might have to do credit monitoring services. There's a variety of different things that you need to do, and it varies by jurisdiction, and it also varies by the jurisdiction of the individual. So if you've got people coming from all over the world to visit your space and you're collecting information from them, could just be basic name, email, credit card, you have to notify them, and you have to notify them in a way that's consistent with the jurisdiction in which they are living. So with these insurers that have this expertise and these consultants working with them, we make sure that we're executing in a way that will protect, from the liability. And then if there ultimately is a liability claim, then the insurance companies have to step up to deal with that for you and defend you and see the claim.
And then also, Robert, to add to that, again, back to Steve's earlier point about understanding, having these conversations, maybe now where we have a little bit of time, perhaps in ways that we didn't before, when everybody was so frantically busy doing their thing. And now we can take pause and actually do things like go back through our policies, make sure that we understand what's in them, ask these questions that are coming up now. What does it really mean, cybercrime? I think Steve just gave a great example, because I know from questions that have come in to us, that's a very, everybody thinks they know this world because we all use the internet, or we're always on our, we're always communicating digitally all the time. But when it comes to cybercrime, the processes that have to take place in order to activate, your insurance policy, there are certain steps that have to be done, and it's a very good idea to make yourself familiar with them now than when you're in the middle of a crisis. Same with all of this, right? Same with all of this.
Yeah, no, it is. It's funny. It is an opportunity to do that, and that's kind of a good lead into the whole business interruption conversation that everybody's having. I mean, this business interruption. So business interruption insurance is designed to pay your loss of, it's usually triggered by a loss of revenue. It's designed to supplement that loss of revenue and to pay your ongoing fixed expenses, your obligation. That could be payroll, it could be any of your other financial obligations. The thing with business interruption is that what it's triggered by is direct physical damage to the asset that's insured. So whether that's a building or piece of equipment or property or contents in the building itself. And there's been a tremendous amount of attention given to the fact that the business interruption policies are not responding to these crises and these closures. The reason being is that there's no physical damage to the properties. Already there have been some initial lawsuits launched, both in Canada and the US. There's some class actions brewing. And I think this is going to be a huge source of litigation for the industry, the insurance industry to deal with, for the buyers to deal with. And unfortunately, all of us are going to feel the impact of that. And we're going to feel it because it's going to be expensive for them to get through. I have no doubt that these challenges will go to the highest courts because at the heart of them, it's the whole, at the heart of it is contract law, in my opinion. Again, not a lawyer, but what we have is a contract. An insurance policy obviously is a contract, and the contract has certain terms and conditions on it. And business interruption insurance has never been written in any different way. There are some unique forms of insurance that are available. We do one, for instance, for producers of live events or performances of theater, dance, or opera. Those have a different trigger, and they do respond differently to this type of thing. And as a result, we've got, in our portfolio, we've got tens of millions of dollars of claims that will be paid for cancellation of performances and events. But traditional business interruption insurance, which many of you will have, is not triggered by what we're dealing with in this pandemic. I would encourage you to talk to your broker. There are, the sort of the industry approach by brokers on this has been to report it to your insurance company, let them deny it. We're also hearing politicians chime in on this, feeling that it's not fair. The stark reality of it is this, that if the insurance companies are forced to pay these claims, I mean, I think there'll be the financial effect on them will be probably the insolvency of insurance companies, because the model just didn't predicate a global triggering of all of these policies. The way they predicate their premiums is based on a building having a fire, a flood, being interrupted, paying that claim, or even an earthquake, which might be catastrophic, or a large flood situation that might affect an area, but not that it affects globally all of their policyholders. And the other thing, the consideration I think that the lawyers and the courts would have to consider is, are you throwing out contract law? Are you throwing out the fact that, well, we know the contract says this, but we're going to dismiss that and we're going to say you got to pay it anyway? And that's huge. That's greater implications on all of us, on every contract that we enter into. So I think it's a really big question that's going to be presented to the courts and through the system. And I think we're a long way away from seeing how that's going to play out. But with that said, I would also encourage you, with the current situation, dig into your insurance policy, your business interruption insurance. Look for things like civil authority extensions where it says interruptions due to the civil authority. Look and see, maybe you've got an extension for interruptions from infectious disease, communicable disease. Definitely take the time to look into it and pose those questions to your insurance providers and ask them. Because even if you've got, extension of $100,000, it's going to be something that is available to you. Because insurers and what they do, like through a softened market, which is obviously it's the opposite of a hard market, it's when they're willing to give you just about anything, bring your premium down, really entice you into buying a policy with them. They'll give you all kinds of things. And what the insurers are right now doing is paring back. They're trying to pull back many of these extensions that they've given. In fact, I've heard some stories of some of these massive programs where they've given a $50,000 or $100,000 extension to all of their policyholder, and now they're into the billions of dollars of claims because of it. So make sure you dig into it. Don't assume that it's not going to be covered. the workers' comp is something we don't get involved in Canada just because it's managed through the provincial systems and the insurance boards. But if you do have employees on workers' compensation insurance, I would look to that, look to guidance from them, and make sure you're satisfying the requirements. Management liability is something that I think we are going to potentially see a lot of claims on. So this is your directors and officers insurance. It gets into not only the solvency and the financial condition of companies, but also employment related issues. We've obviously not, unfortunately, we've seen huge numbers of layoffs, terminations. These no doubt will probably result in claims against organizations. And they can not only necessarily be the termination or the layoff, but it could also be a discrimination when we start to bring people back in. You know, well, such and such was brought back in. I wasn't brought back in because of my age, my gender, my whatever the basis of the claim could be. And insurers in this area, the management liability, are bracing themselves, and I know from talking to them, they're bracing themselves for an onslaught of claims as we continue to deal with this. So management liability is an area, particularly in the not-for-profit world, where what we've seen is we've seen insurance broaden, the coverage broaden, we've seen the premiums come down, and there isn't a lot there. Like a lot of these policies are $700, $800, providing tremendous amount of coverage. I always would say to people that when we got into a human rights complaint, invariably we would always see about $30,000 paid for a human rights complaint. And so some of these will be not necessarily legal claims, but they'll be going through the human rights tribunals. And I know that the insurers are expecting an onslaught of claims. So you want to keep an eye on that policy. It's hugely important. It's covering the personal liability of your directors, your officers, your volunteers, and your staff. And so you've got to be very, very careful when those policies are either being purchased right now or being renewed, that you understand how it compares to what you had in the previous policy period. We certainly have some resources available to people if they want them. And the resources that we're looking at right now, Event Safety Alliance has a really excellent reopening guide. This is one that I've looked at and I really quite like. The Event Safety Alliance is an excellent organization. Both they're based out of the US. We have a Canadian Event Safety Alliance. There's a link right there that you can go to that you can download the guide, and it really is quite excellent. And there's been some really super people that have been part of that. And that's current. That's something that they worked on and they released probably about 2 weeks ago, I would say. Ecclesiastical Insurance Company, we do a lot of business with Ecclesiastical. They're a tremendous sponsor for National Trust. They do the Cornerstone Awards for National Trust. They always have a presence at the conference. Using that link will then take you to a series of articles and things that they are constantly updating about protecting your facilities, your premises, about managing risks with your employees. There's a tremendous amount of really, really good information available to you on their website. So I would really encourage you to go there. And then obviously just monitoring your own provincial, municipal, federal health and safety guidelines.
And then one thing we did want to mention, as I think I mentioned off the top, we with Frontal Insurance, the National Trust is partnered. Right now, it may not be as applicable given that many places are closed, but we recognize the need for so many places of faith specifically to increase the revenue by hosting events, but those third parties renting space have difficulty getting insurance. So creating this portal, this is really Steve's baby, with our other partner, Kendra Fry, who's one of the participants, who developed this this great portal where places of faith have access to insurance for third parties very quickly in this great on this great site. It takes moments to get in. More resources. We have some more resources on our own website at the National Trust, including on our our specific COVID-19 page. I'm rushing through here because we're already at 1 p.m. We've run through here quite
Yeah, that went
quickly.
fast.
That went very, very quickly. I just also want to point out, we have, as I mentioned, we have more webinars coming up. There's one on digital platforms for historic places with some experts on heritage recording and digital platforms. That's tomorrow. And then as you see, they're more on finances and cash flow for historic places. And hopefully soon we will, as I mentioned, we will be doing a bit more of an in-depth discussion on insurance, the broader insurance issues for historic places, those questions that we were raising. Just a quick question, Steve, that Anu had asked. You have a presence in Ottawa, the front row?
We do business in Ottawa. Certainly, Lynn and I are there a couple of times a year. We don't have an office there,
but you are present. I just want to answer that question.
Yeah, we do work across the country, and then we also have offices in the U.S. as well.
Yeah, and just a plug for one of the advocacy things that we're doing right now is for shovel-ready heritage projects to make sure that historic places don't get forgotten in the recovery funding and stimulus funding that's coming up at the federal government. And one of the other activities that we do annually is the Historic Places Day, which usually is an in-person events-based activity at national historic sites across the country. This year, of course, we're going online with some great new ways and supporting historic places for online visitation and extended from through July and into August. So check it out at historicplaces.ca. And just another plug. But I want to first of all say thank you, Steve and Lynn, for this. There are lots. There's lots to learn, and I think one of the overarching messages, and I like the fact that the way that you group this is building related operations and events and projects. Like there's so many aspects that insurance. I think, like many people, insurance is often a mystery to me. But I think what I've learned from working with you guys is that brokers are actually really nice people, and offer amazing resources to help us policyholders understand the policies and the resources that are available to us. So if one of the lessons learned that everybody on the line comes away from is contact your insurance brokers because they are an amazing resource. Sorry, Steve, I know you're on the phone all the time and super busy, but
no, if I can, yeah, no, I mean, every time I'm on a town hall or webinar, I'm happy to help wherever I can. If you need somebody just with maybe some insider knowledge of that, just give me a shout. I will be more than happy to help wherever I can for the members, for sure.
All right. Well, again, thank you both for agreeing to do this, and thank you for the participants. If you have any questions, we will be sending out the deck to everybody that's registered, and as well as the Q&A. But if you ever have any other follow-up questions on this, don't hesitate to contact us at the National Trust, and stay tuned for the other webinars, as I say, with specifically on historic homeowners insurance issues and organizational owners heritage of historic places, their issues as well, which will be coming up soon. So with that, thank you again to everybody, and take care, stay safe, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you soon, Steve and Lynn in Ottawa.
Yeah, absolutely, be wonderful. Take care.
Okay, cheers. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.